The North Atlantic has always inspired stories. Long before satellites watched the oceans from space, before radios connected ships across thousands of miles, and before weather forecasts warned sailors of approaching storms, the Atlantic remained a place of uncertainty. Every voyage depended upon skill, patience, and a little good fortune. Most ships reached their destinations safely. Some returned weeks later than expected. A few never returned at all. And every so often, a ship would appear where no one expected it, its sail still standing, its cargo still secured, its hull floating steadily upon the water. Yet no voices answered from the deck, no footsteps echoed across the wooden planks. No crew welcomed approaching sailors. Only silence remained. For centuries, such discoveries inspired both curiosity and caution. Experienced captains understood that an abandoned vessel could still be dangerous. Loose rigging might swing unexpectedly. Damaged masts could collapse. Hidden fires, leaking cargo, or unstable decks sometimes turned deserted ships into floating hazards. Before anyone stepped aboard, careful observation always came first. From a distance, these lonely vessels often looked perfectly ordinary. Only after drawing closer did their true mystery begin to reveal itself. This is not the story of a single ghost ship. It is the history of many. Real ships, real oceans, real sailors. Across different centuries, the Atlantic witnessed numerous vessels found drifting without their crews. Some disappearances were eventually explained, others remained uncertain. Together, they created one of maritime history's most fascinating collections of unanswered questions. Tonight, we will slowly sail through those forgotten stories, not in search of supernatural legends, but in search of history itself, because history often proves more remarkable than fiction. Our journey begins during the great age of sail. For hundreds of years, wooden ships connected continents. They carried food, timber, spices, textiles, letters, families, explorers, and dreams across enormous distances. The Atlantic became one of the busiest highways on Earth. Every season brought thousands of voyages. Merchant vessels crossed between Europe and North America. Fishing fleets worked the cold northern waters. Naval ships protected trade routes. Whaling expeditions disappeared into distant seas for months at a time. Life aboard these vessels followed careful routines. Before sunrise, sailors climbed into the rigging to inspect ropes and sails. The deck was cleaned, equipment checked. The captain studied weather conditions. Navigation instruments were carefully examined. Meals remained simple: salted meat, hard biscuits, dried peas, fresh water stored inside heavy wooden barrels. Every drop mattered. Fresh food disappeared quickly during long voyages. Discipline was equally important. A ship floating hundreds of miles from land depended entirely upon teamwork. Each sailor understood specific responsibilities. One mistake during rough weather could endanger everyone aboard. Storms rarely gave second chances. Despite these hardships, experienced sailors often described the Atlantic with quiet respect rather than fear. They understood its rhythms. Ocean currents followed predictable paths. Seasonal winds helped ships cross enormous distances. Birds sometimes revealed the approach of nearby land. Cloud formations hinted at changing weather. Knowledge passed from one generation of mariners to the next. Yet no amount of experience eliminated uncertainty completely. The Atlantic always kept a few surprises hidden. Among those surprises were abandoned ships. Finding one was uncommon. Finding several across different generations became something far more remarkable. Official shipping records from the 18th and 19th centuries contain numerous reports describing lonely vessels drifting without anyone aboard. Sometimes another captain spotted them while following regular trade routes. Sometimes naval patrols encountered them unexpectedly. Occasionally, fishermen discovered them near busy coastlines. Every discovery raised immediate questions. Where had the crew gone? Had they escaped in lifeboats? Had a storm forced them into the sea? Was disease responsible? Had another vessel rescued them? Or had something much simpler occurred? Most captains approached abandoned ships with caution. The sea rewarded careful judgment. Sending a boarding party always involved risk. Still, curiosity remained impossible to ignore. Once safely aboard, investigators usually searched for clues. Navigation charts, captain's logs, cargo manifests, personal belongings, meals left unfinished, weather records, anything capable of explaining the silence. Sometimes clear answers appeared almost immediately. A damaged hull suggested flooding. Fire damage revealed an emergency. Evidence of collision explained sudden evacuation. Other times, nothing obvious appeared. The ship seemed ready to continue sailing. Its sails remained secure, its cargo untouched, the captain's cabin orderly, food still stored below deck. Everything looked strangely normal, except for one detail. Every person aboard had vanished. These rare discoveries gradually earned a memorable nickname, ghost ships, not because people believed spirits controlled them, but because they drifted across empty oceans with no living crew to guide them. The name captured the feeling experienced by sailors who first climbed aboard: silence where conversation should have been, stillness where work should have continued, an entire ship waiting patiently upon the sea as though time itself had paused. Stories spread quickly between ports. A captain arriving in Liverpool might describe an abandoned brig encountered weeks earlier. Months later, sailors in Boston repeated the account. Eventually, newspapers printed short reports. Readers became fascinated. Some stories grew larger with every retelling. Others quietly disappeared into maritime archives. As historians would later discover, separating fact from exaggeration required careful investigation. Not every newspaper account proved accurate. Not every sailor remembered every detail perfectly. Legends naturally grew around unusual events. Our purpose tonight is different. Rather than chasing legends, we will follow the strongest historical evidence available. The Atlantic has produced enough genuine mysteries without needing fictional additions. As darkness settles across the open sea, imagine standing quietly upon the deck of a wooden sailing ship. The wind moves gently through the rigging. The stars stretch endlessly overhead. Far ahead, something appears upon the horizon, a ship. Its sails hang silently in the moonlight. No lanterns burn, no voices drift across the water. It neither changes course nor answers signals. It simply continues drifting, waiting for someone to discover the first chapter of another remarkable mystery.
Morning arrives upon the North Atlantic. The first light of dawn spreads gently across the endless water, turning the horizon from deep blue to soft shades of silver and gold. A cool breeze fills the sails. The sea rolls steadily beneath the ship. For the sailors keeping watch, another ordinary day has begun. Hours pass quietly. The crew adjusts the sails as the wind changes. The cook prepares a simple breakfast below deck. The captain studies his charts, carefully comparing the compass with the rising sun. Everything follows the familiar rhythm of life at sea. Then, just before midday, someone calls from the mast. "There is a ship ahead." Every pair of eyes turned toward the horizon. At first, the distant vessel appears completely normal. Its masts stand tall. Several sails remain raised. The hull rides evenly upon the water. Nothing suggests damage, yet something feels unusual. The ship does not appear to be following a steady course. Instead, it drifts slowly with the wind. No signal flags are visible. No smoke rises from the galley. No movement can be seen on deck. The captain raised his telescope. He studied the strange vessel for several long moments. Still nothing. No sailors adjusting the sails. No officer standing near the wheel. No lookout watching from above. Only silence. Experienced captains understood that such a sight demanded caution. An abandoned ship could still carry hidden dangers. A broken mast might collapse without warning. Loose rigging could swing violently. Cargo might have shifted during rough weather, making the vessel unstable. Worse still, disease had occasionally emptied ships in the past. Although rare, outbreaks of yellow fever, cholera, or smallpox could spread rapidly among crews during long voyages. Before anyone boarded, careful observation always came first. The captain ordered his own ship to approach slowly. The distance between the two vessels gradually became smaller. Now individual details could be seen more clearly. The sails were weathered but intact. The rigging moved gently with the wind. Several ropes hung loose, suggesting they had not been adjusted for some time. The wheel stood unattended. No hands guided it. No voices answered when the crew shouted across the water. Only the sound of waves filled the empty space between the ships. The captain waited. Sometimes exhausted sailors remained below deck. Sometimes storms forced crews to shelter inside. A few more calls echoed across the sea. Still no reply. Finally, the decision was made. A small boarding party climbed into a wooden boat. Armed not for battle, but for safety, they rowed carefully toward the silent vessel. Every movement was deliberate. The Atlantic had taught generations of sailors never to underestimate the unexpected. As the boat reached the ship, one sailor caught a hanging rope. Another secured the boat alongside the hull. One by one, they climbed aboard. The deck creaked softly beneath their boots. It felt strangely ordinary. There were no signs of panic, no broken railings, no blood, no evidence of violence. A bucket still rested beside the main mast. Coils of rope remained neatly arranged. The ship appeared ready to continue its voyage. Only the crew was missing. The captain of the boarding party began a careful inspection. The wheel remained unlocked. Navigation instruments rested where they had last been used. The compass still pointed north. Below deck, the galley showed signs that meals had recently been prepared. Cooking utensils remained in place. Fresh water still filled several barrels. In the sleeping quarters, blankets lay folded across bunks. Personal belongings remained where sailors had left them. Clothing, boots, pipes, letters waiting to be delivered. Nothing suggested that the crew had packed for a long journey. If they had abandoned the ship voluntarily, they had done so in remarkable haste. The captain's cabin offered more clues. Charts covered the navigation table. The ship's logbook rested nearby. This was often the most valuable source of information aboard any vessel. Captains carefully recorded weather conditions, course changes, sightings of other ships, and important events. The final entries frequently revealed the crew's last known situation. Sometimes they described heavy storms, sometimes equipment failures. Occasionally, illness. The boarding party carefully examined the final pages. Many historical investigations began exactly this way. Yet even detailed logbooks rarely answered every question. A captain could only record events until the final moment before something unexpected occurred. Beyond that point, history often fell silent. As abandoned ships became more widely reported during the 18th and 19th centuries, maritime authorities developed standard procedures for investigating them. Cargo was carefully documented. Ownership was identified through registration papers. Nearby ports received reports describing the discovery. If possible, efforts were made to determine whether the missing crew had reached safety elsewhere. Sometimes they had. Rescue ships occasionally picked up survivors after storms. Small lifeboats drifted ashore days later. News traveled slowly in those years, and it often took weeks or months before separate reports could be connected. In many cases, what first appeared mysterious eventually received an ordinary explanation, but not always. A handful of abandoned ships resisted every investigation. No survivors were ever found. No confirmed rescue took place. No final report explained the disappearance. These rare cases became legendary among sailors. They were discussed in ports from New York to Liverpool. Each captain added another version of the story. Each voyage carried the mystery farther across the Atlantic. The sea itself seemed to guard the missing answers. Among all these abandoned vessels, one would eventually become the most famous ghost ship in maritime history. Her name would appear in newspapers around the world. Her mystery would inspire books, films, and endless debate. Even today, more than 150 years later, historians continue studying every surviving document connected to her final voyage. She was not the first abandoned ship ever discovered, but she would become the one that defined the legend of the ghost fleet drifting across the Atlantic. And as the afternoon sun slowly lowers toward the western horizon, our journey prepares to meet that remarkable vessel, the Mary Celeste.
The Atlantic Ocean was calm on the morning of December 5, 1872. Not perfectly still. The sea is almost never completely still, but gentle swells rolled beneath the hull of the merchant brig Dei Gratia as she sailed eastward toward Europe. Captain David Morehouse had crossed these waters many times before. He knew the familiar rhythm of the North Atlantic. He knew how quickly the weather could change, and he knew that every distant sail upon the horizon deserved careful attention. Shortly after midday, one of the crew spotted another vessel several miles away. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Ships crossed these trade routes every week. Captains often exchanged greetings before continuing on their separate journeys. But something about this vessel immediately caught the attention of the experienced sailors aboard the Dei Gratia. Its movement looked uncertain. Instead of maintaining a steady course, the ship wandered slightly from side to side. The sails remained raised, but they were not trimmed correctly. The vessel drifted with the wind rather than sailing under confident control. Captain Morehouse lifted his telescope. He watched carefully. No one appeared at the wheel. No lookout stood in the rigging. No sailor adjusted the lines. The deck seemed strangely empty. The captain recognized the ship almost immediately. It was the Mary Celeste. The name was familiar. Only a short time earlier, both ships had departed from New York, although on different schedules. The Mary Celeste carried a cargo of industrial alcohol bound for Genoa, Italy. She was commanded by Captain Benjamin Briggs, a highly respected American mariner. Briggs was known as careful, experienced, and deeply respected by those who sailed with him. Unlike many captains, he had chosen to bring his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, aboard for the voyage. 7 experienced sailors completed the crew. In total, 10 people had departed New York together. Now the ship appeared completely deserted. Captain Morehouse found the situation impossible to ignore. He ordered the Dei Gratia to move closer. As the distance narrowed, the strange silence became even more noticeable. No signal flags flew, no voices answered their calls. The wheel moved freely with the motion of the sea. Still, no one appeared. Finally, Morehouse selected several trusted sailors to board the drifting vessel. Among them was First Mate Oliver DeVoe, an experienced seaman accustomed to difficult situations. A small boat was lowered into the Atlantic. The men rowed steadily toward the silent brig. The closer they came, the stranger everything seemed. The Mary Celeste floated upright. She showed no sign of recent collision. Her masts remained standing. Most of her sails were still attached, although several had been damaged by wind. Nothing suggested that the vessel should have been abandoned. The boarding party climbed aboard. Their boots echoed softly across the empty deck. The first impression was not one of destruction. Instead, it was one of absence. The ship looked as though people had been living and working there only a short time earlier. A length of rope lay neatly coiled. Tools remained where sailors normally kept them. The captain's cabin contained personal belongings. Sarah Briggs' sewing machine stood undisturbed. Children's toys remained inside the family quarters. Clothing hung where it had been left. The crew's pipes and boots rested beside their bunks. Nothing suggested hurried packing. Nothing indicated panic. Below deck, the cargo remained largely untouched. More than 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol still filled the hold. Although a few barrels were later discovered to be empty due to natural leakage, the valuable cargo itself had not been stolen. Food supplies remained aboard. Fresh drinking water was still available. There was enough to support the crew for many more weeks. The ship itself also appeared surprisingly seaworthy. Investigators later found a modest amount of water inside the hull, but this was not unusual for wooden sailing vessels of the period. The pumps showed signs of temporary difficulty, yet the amount of water present was nowhere near enough to sink the ship. Experienced captains agreed that the Mary Celeste should have remained capable of completing her voyage. One important item, however, was missing: the ship's single lifeboat. Its absence immediately attracted attention. If the crew had left voluntarily, the lifeboat offered the most likely explanation. But why would Captain Briggs abandon a vessel that still floated safely? That question would become one of history's greatest maritime mysteries. The boarding party continued searching for clues. They discovered that the ship's official papers were missing. So was the sextant, an essential navigation instrument. The marine chronometer had also disappeared. These were exactly the items a captain would normally carry if leaving the ship intentionally. The final entry in the captain's logbook added another important clue. It had been written several days earlier. According to the recorded position, the Mary Celeste had last been near the Azores Islands. When she was finally discovered, however, she had drifted many miles beyond that location. The missing days could not be explained. No one knew what had happened during that silent stretch of the voyage. Captain Morehouse faced an important decision. Abandoned ships held considerable legal value under maritime law. If a crew successfully recovered such a vessel and delivered it safely to port, they could receive a salvage reward. After ensuring the Mary Celeste remained seaworthy, Morehouse placed a small volunteer crew aboard the abandoned brig. Together, the Dei Gratia and the abandoned brig slowly sailed towards Gibraltar. News of the discovery spread rapidly. Newspapers quickly realized they had an extraordinary story: a perfectly seaworthy ship, an experienced captain, a missing family, 7 vanished sailors, a cargo still intact, and not a single confirmed witness. The world became fascinated. Readers eagerly searched for explanations. Some believed pirates had attacked. Others imagined mutiny.
A few suggested mysterious sea creatures or supernatural forces, but investigators preferred facts over imagination. They knew that the Atlantic often produced mysteries that required patience rather than fantasy. As the Mary Celeste approached Gibraltar under her temporary crew, officials prepared to begin one of the most famous maritime investigations ever conducted. And although they would examine every corner of the ship with remarkable care, the answers they hoped to find would prove far more difficult to uncover than anyone could have imagined.
When the Mary Celeste finally arrived at Gibraltar in December of 1872, the mystery had already begun spreading across the Atlantic. Newspapers in Europe and North America eagerly reported the strange discovery. Readers found it almost impossible to believe. A perfectly seaworthy ship had been found drifting across the ocean. Her cargo remained on board. Her food supplies were untouched. Her crew, including Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, and their young daughter Sophia, had completely vanished. No one knew where they had gone. The authorities at Gibraltar immediately opened an official investigation. During the 19th century, maritime law required careful examination whenever an abandoned vessel arrived in port. Salvage rights depended upon proving that the ship had truly been abandoned and not stolen or deliberately concealed. The investigation was placed under the supervision of Frederick Solly Flood, the Attorney General of Gibraltar. Flood was an experienced lawyer, cautious by nature, and determined to uncover every possible detail. At first, he suspected that something far more complicated had happened than a simple accident at sea. His investigators began examining every corner of the Mary Celeste. The hull was carefully inspected. Aside from normal wear and a small amount of water in the bilge, the ship appeared remarkably sound. There was no evidence of a violent collision. No large holes had been torn through the sides. The vessel floated steadily in the harbor, just as she had when discovered by the Dei Gratia. Attention then turned to the cargo. More than 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol remained safely stored below deck. This cargo was highly valuable. If pirates had attacked the ship, why would they leave such a fortune behind? Nothing suggested robbery. The crew's personal belongings also remained untouched. Captain Briggs's clothing still hung neatly inside his cabin. His wife's sewing supplies rested where she had left them. Books remained on shelves. Furniture had not been disturbed. The small belongings of little Sophia was still scattered around the family's living quarters. Everything suggested that ordinary life aboard the ship had continued until shortly before everyone disappeared. The investigators searched for signs of violence. They found none. No bloodstains marked the deck. No broken weapons lay abandoned. No evidence pointed toward a struggle between crew members. The mystery grew deeper with every room they examined. One detail, however, attracted considerable attention. Several navigation instruments were missing. The sextant had disappeared. The marine chronometer was gone. The ship's official registration papers had also vanished. These were exactly the items a captain would normally carry if leaving the vessel intentionally. Their absence suggested that Captain Briggs may have ordered an organized evacuation rather than a sudden escape. Yet another question immediately followed. Why abandon a ship that still floated safely in the water? Flood remained unconvinced that the crew had left voluntarily. He wondered whether someone aboard the Dei Gratia might somehow have been involved. Perhaps the abandoned ship had not been abandoned at all. Perhaps there had been foul play. The salvage reward offered a possible financial motive. As a result, Captain David Morehouse and the crew of the Dei Gratia faced careful questioning. Their testimony remained calm and consistent. They described exactly how they had discovered the drifting vessel. Their accounts matched one another remarkably well. No evidence suggested they had attacked the Mary Celeste. Furthermore, there was a practical problem with Flood's theory. If the crew of the Dei Gratia had committed such a crime, why leave behind valuable cargo, personal belongings, and obvious evidence that the ship was functioning normally? The theory required too many unlikely assumptions. Gradually, even Flood found it difficult to support. The investigation then considered another possibility: mutiny. Throughout maritime history, disagreements occasionally erupted aboard long voyages. Could dissatisfied sailors have rebelled against Captain Briggs? Again, the evidence argued against it. Benjamin Briggs enjoyed an excellent professional reputation. The crew had been carefully selected. Nothing in their backgrounds suggested violent behavior. Money remained aboard. No valuables had disappeared. Mutiny seemed increasingly improbable. Piracy also attracted attention. Stories of pirates fascinated newspaper readers during the 19th century, but reality offered little support. Pirates rarely abandoned valuable cargo. They certainly did not leave food, supplies, clothing, and expensive equipment untouched. The Mary Celeste showed none of the usual damage associated with armed attacks. The more investigators searched, the fewer convincing explanations remained. Eventually, attention shifted towards the weather. Captain Briggs had sailed through the Atlantic many times before. He understood storms. He respected the sea. Could severe weather somehow have convinced him that remaining aboard posed greater danger than leaving the ship? The question seemed reasonable, but investigators still lacked one essential piece of evidence. What exactly had frightened such an experienced captain? The answer did not appear anywhere aboard the vessel. The logbook contained no dramatic warning. The final entry remained calm and routine. No desperate message had been written. No final explanation had been left behind. History simply became silent. Over the years, later writers often added dramatic details to the story. Some claimed meals remained warm on the table. Others described half-finished cups of coffee. Several books even invented conversations that never occurred. Modern historians have carefully compared these stories with the official records. Most of the dramatic details simply are not supported by the evidence. The real investigation was quieter, more patient, more careful. The Mary Celeste did not appear haunted. She appeared ordinary, and perhaps that made the mystery even more remarkable. Because ordinary ships do not usually become empty in the middle of the Atlantic. As winter settled across Gibraltar Harbor, the investigation slowly reached its limits. Every cabin had been examined, every document had been studied, every witness had spoken. Yet the most important question remained unanswered. Why had Captain Benjamin Briggs chosen to leave a ship that still seemed capable of carrying everyone safely across the ocean? That quiet question would remain unanswered for generations, and as historians would later discover, the most convincing explanation might not involve pirates, mutiny, or impossible mysteries, but something far more subtle, hidden within the cargo, resting quietly beneath the wooden decks of the Mary Celeste.
As the official investigation in Gibraltar gradually came to an end, one fact became increasingly clear. The Mary Celeste had not been abandoned without reason. Captain Benjamin Briggs was known throughout the American merchant fleet as a careful and thoughtful commander. He had spent much of his life at sea. Friends described him as calm under pressure, deeply religious, and committed to protecting both his crew and his family. He was not the kind of captain who would leave a perfectly seaworthy vessel unless he believed staying aboard presented an even greater danger. That realization encouraged later historians to examine the ship's cargo much more closely. Below the decks rested more than 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol. The cargo was valuable and perfectly legal. Factories in Europe depended upon it for manufacturing and other industrial purposes. Transporting such cargo across the Atlantic was common during the 19th century. However, industrial alcohol came with one important risk. Its vapors could become highly flammable.
If enough fumes escaped into an enclosed space, even a small spark might trigger a powerful explosion. Modern investigators reviewing the case noticed something interesting. When the cargo was finally inspected in Gibraltar, several barrels were found to be empty. At first glance, this seemed suspicious, but closer examination suggested another possibility. The barrels themselves had been constructed from porous red oak rather than the stronger white oak used for watertight storage. Over time, small amounts of alcohol could slowly escape as invisible vapor. No one aboard the Mary Celeste would have known exactly how much gas had accumulated below deck. Captain Briggs may have smelled the fumes. He may have worried that an explosion was becoming increasingly likely. Unlike solid cargo, escaping alcohol vapor leaves almost no visible evidence. The danger is largely invisible. Imagine standing aboard a wooden sailing ship hundreds of miles from land. The air below deck carries the sharp smell of industrial alcohol. Perhaps members of the crew begin mentioning it during their daily work. Perhaps the odor grows stronger over several days. No one can see the gas. No one knows whether it has reached dangerous levels. Every lantern, every cooking fire, every spark becomes a potential source of ignition. For an experienced captain, such uncertainty would have been deeply concerning. One modern theory suggests that Captain Briggs decided to put a temporary precaution. Rather than remaining aboard while inspecting the cargo, he may have ordered everyone into the ship's lifeboat. The small boat could have remained attached to the Mary Celeste by a long rope. From a safe distance, the crew could observe the vessel while allowing any accumulated vapors to disperse naturally. Such a decision would not have been unreasonable. In fact, it reflected careful seamanship. The crew would never have intended to abandon the ship permanently. They likely expected to return within a short time. But the Atlantic rarely guarantees that careful plans will succeed. If the tow line connecting the lifeboat to the ship suddenly broke, everything would change within moments. The Mary Celeste, still carrying full sails, would continue moving with the wind. The much smaller lifeboat would quickly lose contact. Within minutes, the distance could become impossible to close. The people in the boat would watch helplessly as their ship slowly disappeared beyond the horizon. This explanation has attracted considerable support among maritime historians, not because it answers every question perfectly, but because it requires very few assumptions. It explains why essential navigation instruments were missing. Captain Briggs would naturally carry the sextant and chronometer into the lifeboat if he expected to navigate temporarily. It explains why the ship remained largely undamaged. It explains why valuable cargo and personal belongings stayed aboard. Most importantly, it reflects the behavior expected from an experienced captain trying to protect his passengers rather than risking an explosion. Modern scientific studies have even tested part of this theory. Researchers recreated conditions similar to those aboard the Mary Celeste. They demonstrated that leaking alcohol vapor could indeed produce a sudden burst of pressure, without leaving obvious burn marks or severe structural damage. A loud explosion might have frightened the crew, even if little physical damage resulted. Imagine hearing such a blast beneath the deck during a long Atlantic voyage. Without knowing its cause, many captains would have feared a far larger explosion was about to follow. Leaving the ship temporarily might have appeared the safest decision. Of course, no surviving witness can confirm that events unfolded exactly this way. History offers probabilities rather than certainty. Still, the alcohol vapor theory remains one of the strongest explanations ever proposed. It respects both the physical evidence and Captain Briggs's professional reputation. Unlike theories involving pirates, mutiny, or supernatural events, it depends entirely on ordinary circumstances combining in an unfortunate sequence. History often unfolds exactly that way. Small decisions, unexpected accidents, moments that seem insignificant until they suddenly become irreversible. If the tow line truly snapped, the crew may have watched the Mary Celeste drifting farther away with every passing minute.
Strong Atlantic winds would have carried the larger vessels steadily onward. The much smaller lifeboat, low in the water and dependent on oars or a small sail, could never match its speed. Eventually, the distance would become overwhelming. The open ocean offers very few second chances. No one knows how long the crew remained together. No one knows whether another ship ever crossed their path. The Atlantic keeps such answers hidden. What remained instead was the empty vessel itself, still floating, still carrying its cargo, still waiting to be discovered by the Dei Gratia. As decades passed, the Mary Celeste became the most famous abandoned ship in maritime history. Yet, it was never truly alone. Across the centuries, other mysterious vessels would also be found drifting silently across the Atlantic, each carrying its own unanswered questions. And our journey through history is only beginning, because beyond the story of the Mary Celeste lies an entire forgotten fleet of ships whose crews also vanished into the endless sea.
Although the Mary Celeste became the most famous abandoned ship in history, she was far from the only vessel ever found drifting without a crew. In fact, long before Captain David Morehouse discovered her in 1872, sailors had already shared stories of lonely ships wandering across the Atlantic. Some of those stories were exaggerated. Others became legends over time. But hidden among them were several well-documented historical cases that continue to puzzle maritime historians even today. Together, they formed what many writers would later call a ghost fleet, not because the ships were haunted, but because they appeared alone upon the sea, moving silently without the people who had once guided them. One remarkable example emerged during the early 19th century. Merchant ships occasionally reported encountering abandoned brigs and schooners drifting hundreds of miles from land. Most had survived powerful storms. Their masts remained standing. Their sails, though damaged, still caught the wind. When boarding parties climbed aboard, they often found familiar scenes. Cooking pots rested near cold stoves. Navigation charts remained spread across wooden tables. Water barrels were still partly full. The sea had not destroyed these ships, it had simply emptied them. Investigators usually began by asking the same questions. Could another vessel have rescued the crew? Had disease forced everyone into lifeboats? Did severe weather separate the sailors from their ship? Sometimes the answers eventually appeared weeks later. A rescue vessel arrived at port carrying exhausted survivors. A lifeboat drifted onto a distant coastline. Families received letters explaining what had happened. Those mysteries quietly disappeared into ordinary maritime history. Others never did. Among the most intriguing was the British merchant ship Jenny. According to popular accounts, the vessel became trapped in Antarctic ice during the early 19th century and was discovered years later with everyone aboard having died from exposure. The story spread through newspapers and magazines for generations. It sounded haunting, a perfectly preserved ship, a captain still seated at his desk, a crew frozen in time. Yet modern historians have carefully searched shipping records and official documents. Surprisingly, they found almost no reliable evidence that the event actually happened. The famous tale appears to have grown through repeated retelling rather than documented investigation. It serves as an important reminder. Not every famous ghost ship story is genuine history. Separating historical evidence from popular legend requires patience. The Atlantic has produced enough authentic mysteries without adding fictional ones. Another genuine case involved vessels found after violent hurricanes. The Caribbean and Western Atlantic regularly experienced powerful storms capable of scattering entire fleets. Ships that survived sometimes drifted for weeks before another captain discovered them. Crews occasionally abandoned perfectly floating vessels because they believed sinking was inevitable. Without modern communication, rescue often depended entirely upon chance. A lifeboat and its parent ship could lose sight of each other within minutes. Strong winds carried each in different directions. Even experienced navigators found it nearly impossible to reunite once separated. This reality helps explain why abandoned ships appeared more frequently during the age of sail than they do today. The ocean was simply much larger in practical terms. No radios connected nearby vessels, no aircraft searched from above, no satellites tracked drifting ships. If disaster struck hundreds of miles from land, survivors relied entirely upon luck. Some were rescued, many were not. Maritime insurance companies gradually became interested in these mysterious discoveries. Every abandoned ship represented financial uncertainty. Cargo owners wanted explanations, ship owners wanted compensation. Investigators therefore collected detailed reports whenever possible. These records survive in archives today. Reading them reveals something fascinating. Most abandoned ships looked surprisingly ordinary. There were rarely signs of dramatic catastrophe. Instead, investigators described quiet scenes: a captain's coat hanging beside the cabin door, a half-finished repair left on deck, fresh drinking water still stored below, cargo carefully secured. Life appeared to have paused rather than ended. Perhaps this ordinary appearance explains why ghost ships captured the imagination so completely. Human beings naturally expect dramatic causes to produce dramatic results. Yet history often unfolds differently. Sometimes extraordinary mysteries begin with ordinary decisions. A damaged pump, a mistaken weather forecast, a snapped rope, a leaking cargo barrel, a single unexpected wave. Small events can combine into consequences no one anticipates. The Atlantic teaches this lesson repeatedly. Even today, modern cargo ships occasionally lose communication during severe weather. Fishing boats disappear in heavy seas. Search and rescue teams continue responding to emergencies across the North Atlantic every year. Technology has reduced many risks. It has not eliminated them. The ocean remains powerful, patient, unpredictable. Historians studying abandoned ships have noticed another common pattern. Public imagination often grows much faster than verified evidence. A simple newspaper report becomes a dramatic magazine article. The magazine inspires a novel. The novel influences a film. Eventually, millions of people remember details that never appeared in the original investigation. The Mary Celeste experienced exactly this transformation. So did many lesser-known ghost ships. Careful historical research gently removes those additions, revealing quieter but often more believable stories beneath them. In many ways, the truth proves more interesting than fiction, because it reminds us that real sailors faced genuine dangers every day. They did not need monsters or ghosts to explain the Atlantic. The ocean itself provided more than enough challenges. As another calm evening settles across the vast Atlantic, countless waves continue their endless journey from horizon to horizon. Somewhere beneath those waters rest the remains of ships whose stories have been forgotten. Others survived long enough to drift silently into history, carrying with them questions that may never receive complete answers. And among those unanswered stories lies one particularly unusual vessel whose final voyage would challenge investigators for generations to come.
As maritime records from the 19th and early 20th centuries continued to grow, historians began noticing an interesting pattern. Many abandoned ships had far more in common than people first realized. The details of each case were different. The names changed, the captains changed, the cargoes changed, but the circumstances often followed surprisingly similar paths. A vessel departed from a busy port. Everything appeared routine. Weather reports suggested an ordinary voyage. Weeks later, another ship encountered the same vessel drifting alone across the Atlantic. The crew had disappeared. The cargo remained. The mystery began. One such case involved the American schooner Carroll A.
Unlike the Mary Celeste, this story unfolded during the early 20th century when communication at sea had improved but was still far from perfect. The schooner had completed a successful commercial voyage to South America and was returning north along the eastern coast of the United States. Captain William Merritt originally commanded the ship, but illness forced him to leave before the voyage was completed. A new captain, William Wormel, assumed command. Wormel was an experienced mariner with decades of sailing behind him. Few people expected trouble. The voyage north initially appeared uneventful. The Carroll A Deering stopped at several ports before continuing toward the eastern coast of the United States. Along the way, lighthouse keepers and other captains occasionally spotted the schooner. Nothing seemed seriously wrong. Yet one observation later attracted attention. A lighthouse keeper near Cape Lookout reported seeing a man aboard who did not appear to be the captain. The stranger called through a speaking tube, mentioning that the ship had lost its anchors. At the time, the exchange seemed ordinary enough. Ships occasionally lost equipment during rough weather. No one imagined that it would become one of the last confirmed sightings of the vessel under human control. Only a few days later, the Carroll A Deering was discovered aground on Diamond Shoals, a dangerous area off the coast of North Carolina. Rescue crews quickly approached, but when they climbed aboard, they found something strangely familiar. The ship was empty. Every member of the crew had disappeared. The lifeboats were gone. Navigation equipment had vanished. Personal belongings remained scattered through the cabins. The galleys showed signs of recent activity. Food supplies were still aboard. The ship itself had not been destroyed. It had simply arrived without the people who had sailed her. Government investigators immediately began examining the case. Unlike the Mary Celeste, this story occurred during the era when telegraph communication allowed information to travel much faster. Authorities interviewed witnesses. They reviewed shipping records. They questioned nearby vessels. Several possibilities emerged. Perhaps the crew abandoned ship during a storm. Perhaps mutiny had occurred. Some even wondered whether alcohol smuggling or organized crime had played a role. The early 20th century saw increasing criminal activity along parts of the American coastline. Yet every theory encountered the same difficulty. Very little physical evidence remained. The sea had once again removed the final chapter before investigators arrived. Modern historians generally believe that severe weather probably contributed to the loss. Diamond Shoals had earned a grim reputation long before the Carroll A Deering arrived there. Hidden sandbars constantly shifted beneath the water. Powerful currents complicated navigation. Hundreds of ships had already been wrecked nearby over previous centuries. The region became known as the Graveyard of the Atlantic. The nickname reflected reality rather than exaggeration. Even experienced captains treated those waters with great caution. Still, the disappearance of the crew itself remains uncertain. No confirmed record explains exactly when or why they left the schooner. Their fate has never been fully established. The Carroll A Deering therefore joined the growing list of abandoned Atlantic vessels whose final moments remain hidden by history. Cases like these reveal an important truth. Not every ghost ship represents the same kind of mystery. Some were abandoned because of storms, others because of mechanical failures, a few because captains believed evacuation offered the safest option. Occasionally, investigators never discovered enough evidence to decide between several reasonable explanations. History often leaves multiple possibilities, rather than one perfect answer. This uncertainty sometimes frustrates modern readers, yet it also reflects the reality of life at sea. The Atlantic rarely preserved detailed evidence. Wind erased footprints. Rain washed away traces. Waves carried away lifeboats, debris, and sometimes entire ships. Investigators usually arrived days or weeks after the decisive events had already passed.
By then, nature had completed much of its own quiet work. Looking across these different cases, historians have become increasingly cautious about dramatic explanations. The simplest answer often proves the strongest. Ordinary people faced extraordinary conditions. Experienced sailors made difficult decisions with limited information. Sometimes those decisions succeeded, sometimes they did not. The abandoned ships left behind became silent reminders of those moments. As twilight slowly settles over the Atlantic once more, imagine another lonely vessel drifting beyond the horizon. Its sails move gently in the evening breeze. The deck remains perfectly still. The sea carries it patiently westward. No voices answer passing ships. No signals rise into the fading light. Only the endless rhythm of the ocean continues, guarding yet another chapter in the long and quiet history of the ghost fleet that once drifted across the Atlantic. By the early 20th century, abandoned ships had become one of the Atlantic's most enduring maritime mysteries. Every few years, newspapers published another unusual report: a drifting schooner, an empty brig, a fishing vessel found with no one aboard. Readers were immediately fascinated. The stories seemed almost impossible to believe. How could an entire crew simply disappear while the ship remained afloat? For sailors, however, the mystery felt less surprising. Those who spent their lives at sea understood something that people on land often overlooked. A ship is not a building. It is a moving home surrounded by one of the most unpredictable environments on Earth. Every decision made aboard depends upon changing weather, shifting winds, powerful currents, and constant observation. Small mistakes rarely remain small for long. One damaged sail can reduce a ship's speed. One broken pump can slowly fill the hull with water. One snapped rope can change the course of an entire voyage. Because of this, experienced captains were trained to think several hours ahead. They constantly asked themselves simple questions. What will the weather do next? Will the wind strengthen before sunset? Can the cargo remain secure? Should repairs be made now or after the storm? These quiet decisions rarely appeared in newspapers, yet they often determined whether a voyage ended safely. Historians studying abandoned ships have found that many mysteries likely began with such ordinary choices. Consider a captain who notices increasing water inside the hull. The pumps continue working, but only just. Dark clouds gather along the western horizon. The crew debates whether the ship can survive another night at sea. No one can see the future. Every decision carries risk. If they remain aboard and the ship sinks, everyone may perish. If they abandon the vessel too early, they may lose a perfectly seaworthy ship. Choosing between those possibilities requires experience rather than certainty. The Atlantic offers no guarantees. This understanding has changed the way modern maritime historians interpret many ghost ship stories. Earlier generations often searched for dramatic explanations: pirates, mutiny, sea monsters, even supernatural forces. Today's researchers usually begin somewhere much simpler: weather, navigation, mechanical failure, human judgment. Because these ordinary factors explain far more maritime accidents than extraordinary theories ever could. One forgotten example involved small fishing vessels operating near Newfoundland during the late 19th century. Several boats disappeared after leaving port under apparently favorable conditions. Weeks later, a few were found drifting empty. Their nets remained aboard. Their equipment looked undisturbed. The sea had claimed the fishermen, but spared their boats. Modern researchers believe sudden weather changes likely overwhelmed the crews before they could return. No mystery beyond nature itself was required. Similar events occurred around the coast of Iceland, the Faroe Islands, and northern Scotland. Cold water added another danger.
Even strong swimmers survive only a short time in near-freezing temperatures. A sailor washed overboard during rough seas had very little chance of rescue, especially before modern life jackets and emergency communications became common. Crews naturally attempted rescues. Sometimes several men entered lifeboats to search for a missing companion. If the weather worsened unexpectedly, both the lifeboat and the parent ship could be lost to one another. Such possibilities appear repeatedly throughout maritime history. They rarely make dramatic headlines, yet they quietly explain many disappearances. Technology gradually reduced these risks. By the middle of the 20th century, radio communication transformed life at sea. Ships could call for assistance over enormous distances. Weather reports became far more accurate. Later, radar improved navigation during darkness and fog. Eventually, satellite positioning allowed captains to know their location with remarkable precision. Today, a large merchant ship crossing the Atlantic remains in almost constant communication with the outside world. If something unusual occurs, rescue services often learn about it within minutes. This modern reality makes historical ghost ships seem even more remarkable. They belonged to a world where silence could last for weeks. A missing ship might not be reported until it failed to arrive at its destination. Searching thousands of square miles of open ocean without aircraft or satellites proved nearly impossible. Many mysteries, therefore, remained unsolved simply because investigators never reached the scene in time. The Atlantic had already erased the evidence. Even now, oceanographers remind us that the sea remains surprisingly unexplored. The Atlantic covers millions of square miles. Its average depth exceeds 2 miles. Powerful currents constantly reshape its surface. Storms appear and disappear with remarkable speed. Nature still controls much of what happens there. That perspective helps explain why historians approach abandoned ship stories with humility. Not every question can receive a complete answer. Sometimes evidence simply disappears before anyone can collect it, and that is perfectly consistent with the history of the sea. As evening settles once again across the North Atlantic, imagine standing quietly upon the deck of a lonely sailing ship. The wind has become gentle. The waves rise and fall beneath the hull. Far away, another vessel crosses the horizon, its lantern glowing softly in the growing darkness. For a brief moment, the two ships share the same vast ocean. Then distance slowly separates them once again. The Atlantic has witnessed this quiet meeting countless times. Some voyages ended safely in busy harbors, others faded into history. And among those forgotten journeys lies another remarkable story, one that involved a vessel that seemed to appear from nowhere, carrying almost everything aboard except the people who once called it home.
As historians continued examining abandoned ships throughout the 20th century, one important lesson slowly became clear. No two mysteries were ever exactly the same. Each drifting vessel carried its own story, its own captain, its own crew, its own final hours hidden somewhere beyond the horizon. Yet together, these ships revealed something larger than any single disappearance. They revealed the true character of the Atlantic itself. The ocean has never been an empty space between continents. It is a living environment, constantly changing. Warm currents flow north from the tropics. Cold water moves south from the Arctic. Powerful storms form with little warning. Dense fog can appear within minutes. Invisible underwater currents influence every voyage. Long before satellites mapped these movements, sailors learned to recognize subtle signs: the color of the water, the flight of seabirds, the shape of distant clouds, the smell of approaching rain. Generations of experience became their greatest navigation system. Even so, nature often remained one step ahead. A captain might correctly predict calm weather for most of the day. Then, without warning, a powerful squall would sweep across the sea.
Strong winds could tear sails apart. Heavy waves could damage masts. Visibility might disappear almost instantly. During such moments, every sailor aboard had a responsibility. Some secured loose cargo, others climbed into the rigging despite dangerous conditions. The captain remained at the wheel, making rapid decisions with incomplete information. History often remembers famous discoveries and heroic battles, but it rarely records the countless ordinary moments when experienced sailors quietly prevented disaster through skill alone. Many ghost ships remind us of those unseen efforts. The fact that a vessel was later found abandoned does not mean its crew acted carelessly. More often, they were making the best decision possible under extraordinary circumstances. Maritime historians frequently emphasize this point. Captain Benjamin Briggs, Captain William Wormel, and many lesser-known commanders all shared similar reputations. They were respected professionals. Their disappearances should never be interpreted as evidence of poor judgment. Instead, they demonstrate how quickly even experienced mariners could face situations beyond their control. One particularly fascinating aspect of abandoned ships involves the condition in which they were discovered. Many vessels appeared surprisingly clean. Cabins remained organized. Navigation charts rested neatly upon tables. Cargo stayed secured below deck. To modern observers, this almost peaceful appearance can seem unsettling. Yet experienced sailors recognize something different. A well-maintained ship reflects disciplined habits. Crew members routinely cleaned the decks. Equipment was carefully stored. Ropes were neatly coiled after every adjustment. Orderliness was essential aboard sailing vessels. The sea rewarded preparation. Therefore, an abandoned ship often looked exactly as it had during ordinary life, except for the absence of people. This ordinary appearance gave birth to extraordinary legends. Novelists imagined ghostly figures walking deserted decks. Artists painted mysterious ships drifting beneath moonlit skies. Filmmakers later transformed historical mysteries into supernatural adventures. These stories entertained millions of readers and viewers. There is nothing wrong with imagination, but history tells a quieter story. The real Atlantic required no ghosts. It possessed enough mystery on its own. Oceanographers today study waves that can suddenly rise far above surrounding seas. These rare rogue waves have been measured reaching astonishing heights. For centuries, sailors reported enormous walls of water appearing without warning. Many people dismissed these accounts as exaggeration. Only modern instruments confirmed that such waves truly exist. History occasionally proves old sailors correct. Similarly, scientists now understand weather systems far better than investigators did during the 19th century. Rapid pressure changes, unexpected wind shifts, localized storms, all can create dangerous situations difficult to predict using the technology available at the time. This growing scientific knowledge has gradually replaced many older myths with realistic explanations. Yet one important truth remains unchanged. Not every mystery can be solved completely. Evidence has limits. When a lifeboat disappears beneath the Atlantic, investigators lose their most important source of information. The people who experienced those final moments are no longer able to describe them. History therefore must rely upon the clues left behind. Sometimes those clues point clearly towards one explanation. Sometimes they leave several possibilities equally reasonable. Accepting that uncertainty is part of responsible historical research. As our journey through the Ghost Fleet continues, we begin to notice something unexpected. These stories are not really about abandoned ships. They are about people. Captains making difficult decisions, families trusting experienced sailors, crew members working together during dangerous voyages. Every empty vessel once carried ordinary human lives. Their courage deserves as much attention as their disappearance.
As night gradually spreads across the Atlantic once again, the stars begin reflecting upon the gentle waves. The sea appears peaceful, almost timeless. Somewhere beyond the darkness, another forgotten ship drifts slowly through history. Its name may no longer appear on modern maps, its crew may never be fully known, yet its silent voyage has become part of the long and remarkable story of the Atlantic, a story that continues with one final chapter, where history, science, and remembrance come together beneath the endless northern sky.
As the 20th century progressed, maritime technology transformed almost every aspect of life at sea. The age of wooden sailing ships slowly came to an end. Steel vessels replaced timber hulls. Steam engines gave way to powerful diesel machinery. Radio antennas appeared above bridges where tall masts had once carried great canvas sails. Navigation became more precise with every passing decade. Yet despite these remarkable advances, the Atlantic never lost its ability to surprise those who crossed it. Modern captains still speak about the ocean with quiet respect. The sea has become safer, it has never become harmless. This realization encouraged historians to revisit many of the famous ghost ship mysteries from the past. Rather than asking dramatic questions, they began asking practical ones. What weather systems existed during the voyage? What cargo was being carried? How experienced was the crew? What equipment was available aboard? Could natural forces explain what earlier generations could not? One by one, old mysteries became slightly clearer, not completely solved, but better understood. Take the Mary Celeste once again. For decades, writers imagined pirates, monsters, or supernatural events. Modern research paints a far quieter picture. Leaking alcohol vapors, a temporary evacuation, a tow line breaking in rough seas, an experienced captain making a reasonable decision that ended in tragedy. The mystery remains, but its foundation rests firmly within the laws of nature. The same careful approach has been applied to many other abandoned ships. Storm records have been compared with shipping logs. Ocean currents have been reconstructed using modern computer models. Even the construction methods of 19th century ships have been carefully studied. Researchers discovered that many vessels behaved differently under heavy weather than earlier investigators had realized. Some remained afloat for weeks after being abandoned. Others drifted hundreds or even thousands of miles before finally being discovered. The Atlantic itself became an active participant in these investigations. Ocean currents, once poorly understood, revealed remarkable patterns. The Gulf Stream carried warm water northward along the eastern coast of North America before turning toward Europe. Cold Labrador currents flowed south. These enormous rivers within the sea quietly transported drifting ships across astonishing distances. A vessel abandoned near the Azores might later appear hundreds of miles away. Without understanding the currents, early investigators often assumed impossible journeys had taken place. Science replaced confusion with careful explanation. Another important discovery involved communication. Before wireless radio became common, ships could vanish without leaving a single message. Families often waited months before learning that a vessel was overdue. Shipping companies searched newspapers for reports from distant ports. Lighthouse keepers carefully recorded passing ships. Every small observation became valuable. Today, a merchant ship crossing the Atlantic constantly broadcasts its position through satellite systems. Its course can be followed almost in real time. If communication suddenly stops, authorities know almost immediately. Search operations begin quickly. Aircraft, helicopters, rescue vessels, and satellites work together. This dramatic improvement explains why true ghost ships have become extraordinarily rare in modern times. Technology has not eliminated accidents. It has simply made prolonged mysteries much less common. Still, abandoned vessels occasionally appear even today. Fishing boats have been found drifting after storms. Pleasure yachts have crossed oceans without anyone aboard.
Cargo ships have suffered mechanical failures and continued floating long after their crews were rescued. Each modern case reminds us that the Atlantic remains as vast as ever. Human knowledge has grown, nature has not become smaller. Historians sometimes describe ghost ships as floating time capsules. When a deserted vessel is discovered, it preserves a brief moment from the past. The captain's chart remains open to its final course. A lantern rests where someone last placed it. A meal may still sit untouched in the galley. These quiet details transform abandoned ships into remarkable historical records. They tell us how sailors lived, how they worked, how they organized daily life far from land. Even when the final chapter remains unknown, the earlier pages survive remarkably well. Museums around the world now preserve many artifacts recovered from historic vessels. Old sextants, compasses, logbooks, navigation charts, weather instruments, simple everyday tools once handled by ordinary sailors. Each object reminds us that history is built not only from famous events, but also from ordinary routines carried out by ordinary people. The Ghost Fleet drifting across the Atlantic was never truly a fleet sailing together. It was a collection of separate stories, connected by one shared theme: silence. Each abandoned ship offered investigators the same challenge. A vessel remained, the people did not. Everything else had to be reconstructed through careful observation. As evening once again settles over the Atlantic, imagine standing aboard a modern research vessel. Sophisticated radar scans the horizon. GPS satellites report your exact location. Weather forecasts appear instantly on digital screens. Yet beyond the glow of technology, the ocean looks much the same as it did centuries ago. The waves continue their endless rhythm. The wind still carries the scent of salt. The stars still guide those who choose to look upward. And somewhere beneath those waters rest the forgotten stories of countless voyages, some remembered, some lost forever, and some still waiting patiently for history to understand them just a little bit better.
As our journey through the Ghost Fleet begins to slow, it becomes easier to see these abandoned ships from a different perspective. At the beginning of our voyage, they seemed mysterious, silent vessels drifting without crews, questions without answers, stories surrounded by uncertainty. But after traveling through centuries of maritime history, another picture begins to emerge. These ships are not simply mysteries, they are reminders. They remind us how much courage ordinary sailors carried with them every time they left the safety of a harbor. A voyage across the Atlantic was never routine. Even during peaceful weather, every day required discipline. The crew rose before sunrise, the decks were cleaned, the sails inspected, the compass checked, the captain reviewed his charts, meals were prepared, repairs were completed. Every small task helped prepare the ship for challenges that might arrive without warning. There were no weekends at sea, no easy way to ask for help. The ocean demanded attention every hour of every day. Many sailors spent months without seeing land. Letters from home could not reach them until the voyage ended. Families waited patiently, often with very little news. Sometimes a ship arrived exactly on schedule. Sometimes storms delayed it for weeks. Occasionally, it never returned at all. Harbor towns understood this uncertainty better than anyone. People gathered along the docks whenever sails appeared on the horizon. Merchants waited for valuable cargo. Children searched for familiar faces. Wives hoped to see husbands returning safely. Parents looked for sons beginning another chapter of their lives. The arrival of a ship meant far more than commerce. It meant reunion. That human side of maritime history is sometimes forgotten when ghost ship stories become famous. Newspapers often focused upon mystery because mystery attracted readers. Headlines asked dramatic questions. Where had the crew gone? Who was responsible? What terrible event had taken place? Such questions are understandable, But behind every unanswered mystery stood real families living with uncertainty. Captain Benjamin Briggs left behind relatives who never learned exactly what happened during his final voyage. The same was true for countless other sailors whose names rarely appear in history books. For them, the Atlantic offered no final explanation, only silence. Modern historians try to remember both parts of these stories. The mystery matters, but the people matter even more. This balanced approach has changed the way museums present maritime history today. Rather than celebrating unsolved mysteries alone, exhibitions increasingly explore the daily lives of sailors. Visitors learn how ships were navigated, how food was prepared, how storms were survived, how friendships formed during long months at sea. These ordinary details create a deeper understanding of extraordinary events. A ghost ship becomes more meaningful once we imagine the lives that once filled its empty cabins. Picture a quiet evening aboard a merchant brig during the late 19th century. The day's work has ended. One sailor repairs a jacket beneath the glow of an oil lamp. Another writes a letter he hopes to mail at the next port. Someone quietly plays a fiddle. The cook prepares tomorrow's bread. Above deck, the captain studies the stars before making one final note in the logbook. Everything feels calm, comfortable, routine. No one aboard knows that future generations may one day study this voyage. History often begins that way, not with dramatic moments, but with ordinary evenings that suddenly become extraordinary because of what happens next. This understanding also changes the meaning of abandoned ships. Instead of imagining mysterious vessels appearing from nowhere, we begin seeing them as homes interrupted, places where ordinary life suddenly stopped. The empty bunks, the neatly folded blankets, the untouched meals. These are not signs of ghosts, they are signs of people who expected to return. That quiet expectation may be the most moving detail of all. No captain willingly leaves behind a well-kept ship without believing there is hope. Every evacuation begins with the intention of survival. Every lifeboat launched into the Atlantic carries optimism alongside necessity. The tragedy lies not in the decision itself, but in the possibility that nature refused to offer another chance. The Atlantic has always demanded respect because it possesses extraordinary power without intention. The sea does not choose victims. Storms hold no anger. Waves carry no malice. Nature simply follows its own laws. Understanding this helps explain why experienced sailors spoke about the ocean with respect rather than fear. They accepted that complete control was impossible. Preparation mattered. Skill mattered. Judgment mattered. Yet humility mattered just as much. Perhaps that lesson remains the greatest legacy of the Ghost Fleet. The abandoned ships remind us that even the most experienced people sometimes face situations beyond human control. There is no shame in that reality, only quiet honesty. As darkness settles gently across the Atlantic once again, the horizon slowly disappears into the evening mist. The wind softens, the waves become gentle. Somewhere beyond the fading light, another forgotten voyage continues only in memory. The sea keeps its secrets with remarkable patience. History keeps searching with equal patience. Between them lies the quiet space where many of the world's greatest maritime mysteries still peacefully rest. As our long journey through the history of the Ghost Fleet begins to draw toward its conclusion, one final question quietly remains. Why do these stories continue to fascinate people after so many generations? The answer is not found in ghosts, nor is it found in impossible mysteries. Instead, it lies in something far more familiar: human curiosity. From the earliest days of civilization, people have looked toward the horizon and wondered what waited beyond it. The sea has always represented both opportunity and uncertainty. It connects continents. It carries trade, ideas, and exploration. At the same time, it reminds us that not every journey ends with complete certainty. The Atlantic has witnessed triumphs beyond counting. It has also witnessed quiet tragedies that history can only partially explain. Ghost ships belong to that second tradition. They are not monuments to fear. They are monuments to unanswered questions. Modern historians often describe maritime history as a conversation between evidence and imagination. Evidence tells us what can be known. Imagination fills the empty spaces. The challenge is remembering which is which. Throughout the years, countless authors have added dramatic details to famous ghost ship stories. Some wrote about ghostly figures walking deserted decks. Others described mysterious lights appearing above lonely vessels. A few invented entire conversations between sailors who never existed. Such stories can certainly be entertaining, but they belong to literature rather than history. Real history asks quieter questions. What did the weather records show? How experienced was the captain? What condition was the ship in when it was found? What do surviving logbooks reveal? These questions may seem less exciting than legends, yet they often lead to far deeper understanding. History does not become less interesting when myths are removed. It becomes more meaningful, because we begin seeing real people instead of fictional characters. Captain Benjamin Briggs was not a legend. He was a husband, a father, a respected sailor trusted by his crew. Captain William Wormel was not a mysterious figure from folklore. He was an experienced mariner navigating difficult waters. The lighthouse keepers of isolated islands, the fishermen working near Newfoundland, the merchant sailors crossing between Europe and America, each belonged to the same remarkable tradition: ordinary people performing extraordinary work beneath extraordinary conditions. That realization changes the meaning of every abandoned ship. Instead of asking only how the mystery happened, we begin asking how these people lived, how they learned navigation, how they prepared meals during long voyages, how they repaired damaged sails in freezing winds, how friendships formed during months at sea. Those quiet details survive in diaries, letters, shipping records, and museum collections. Together they create a far richer story than mystery alone ever could. Oceanographers sometimes describe the Atlantic as a living system. Warm and cold currents constantly exchange energy. Storms form, weaken, and disappear. Marine life migrates across enormous distances. Nothing remains completely still. Perhaps history works in much the same way. Every generation revisits old mysteries with new knowledge. Questions that once seemed impossible gradually become understandable. Not because history changes, but because our understanding grows. The Mary Celeste is an excellent example. For decades, impossible theories dominated popular imagination. Today, careful research strongly favors practical explanations rooted in weather, cargo, and seamanship. The mystery has not vanished. It has simply become quieter, more human, more believable. That transformation reflects one of history's greatest strengths: patience. Historians are willing to say, "We do not know everything." Those words may sound simple, yet they require honesty. Accepting uncertainty is often more difficult than inventing certainty. The Ghost Fleet teaches this lesson beautifully. Some answers remain beyond reach. The Atlantic has carried away too much evidence. Time has erased too many details. Still, enough remains to understand the lives of the people who once sailed these waters, and perhaps that understanding matters most of all. Imagine standing one final time upon the deck of a 19th century sailing ship. The evening sky glows softly above the western horizon. The crew quietly finishes another ordinary day. Someone secures the final rope. Someone checks tomorrow's course. The captain closes the logbook after writing a few careful lines. Nothing about the evening seems unusual, yet history often begins with evenings exactly like this: quiet, peaceful, unremarkable. Only later do future generations realize they were witnessing the beginning of a story that would never receive a final explanation. As darkness slowly settles across the Atlantic once again, the wind carries the familiar scent of salt through the rigging. The sea stretches endlessly in every direction. Somewhere beyond the horizon, forgotten ships continue drifting in memory rather than water. Their voyages ended long ago. Their stories continue still. And with every passing generation, the Atlantic gently reminds us that not every mystery is meant to be solved. Some are simply meant to be remembered.
The night has become wonderfully quiet. The Atlantic stretches endlessly beneath the sky filled with stars. The wind moves gently across the water, carrying the same cool ocean air that sailors have felt for centuries. Far in the distance, the steady light of a lighthouse slowly sweeps across the horizon. Somewhere beyond that light, modern cargo ships continue their journeys between continents. Powerful engines have replaced towering sails. Digital charts have replaced handwritten maps. Satellites now guide captains across oceans that once depended only on the stars. Yet, despite every technological advance, the Atlantic remains what it has always been: vast, beautiful, patient, and worthy of respect. Our journey through the history of the Ghost Fleet now reaches its peaceful conclusion. Along the way, we met famous ships like the Mary Celeste. We explored lesser-known abandoned vessels recorded in forgotten maritime archives. We learned how storms, currents, weather, and human judgment shaped countless voyages across one of the world's greatest oceans. Most importantly, we discovered that history rarely needs supernatural explanations. Reality is often mysterious enough. The sailors who crossed these waters were not seeking adventure for its own sake. Most were simply doing their jobs. Captains carried valuable cargo to distant ports. Crew members climbed icy rigging before sunrise. Cooks prepared simple meals in rolling kitchens. Carpenters repaired damaged masts while waves crashed against the hull. Every voyage demanded teamwork. Every successful crossing represented thousands of small decisions made correctly. Those quiet achievements rarely appeared in newspapers. Instead, history remembered the unusual voyages, the abandoned ships, the missing crews, the unanswered questions. But perhaps the greatest lesson of the Ghost Fleet is not found in the mysteries themselves. It is found in the ordinary courage of the people behind them. Each empty vessel once echoed with conversation. Boots crossed its wooden deck. Lanterns glowed through long winter nights. Laughter occasionally drifted across the sea after difficult days. Letters were written to families waiting far away. Dreams of returning home filled every cabin. The silence discovered later by investigators reminds us that real lives once filled those spaces. That human connection gives every ghost ship its lasting meaning. Modern maritime museums preserve old compasses, sextants, logbooks, and weathered maps from that remarkable age of sail. Visitors often pause before these simple objects. They are not valuable because of the materials from which they were made. They matter because ordinary hands once depended upon them. A compass guided families safely across oceans. A logbook recorded another peaceful sunset. A telescope searched distant horizons for signs of changing weather.
These ordinary tools became quiet witnesses to extraordinary history. Scientists continue studying the Atlantic today. Oceanographers map deep underwater mountains. Marine biologists follow the migrations of whales and seabirds. Meteorologists analyze storms with satellites orbiting high above the Earth. Every year, our understanding grows a little deeper. Yet even now, researchers freely admit that the ocean still contains countless mysteries. That honesty is one of science's greatest strengths. Some questions have answers, others simply require patience. History teaches exactly the same lesson. Not every missing page can be recovered. Not every final voyage can be completely reconstructed. Sometimes evidence disappears forever beneath the sea. Accepting that reality does not weaken history, it strengthens it, because truth is built upon evidence rather than certainty alone. As we prepare to leave the Atlantic behind us for tonight, imagine standing quietly on the deck of a peaceful sailing ship. The waves rise and fall with gentle rhythm beneath your feet. The stars shine brightly overhead. A cool breeze fills the sails. Far ahead, the faint glow of another lighthouse appears along the distant coastline. Home is somewhere beyond that light. The crew speaks softly as another calm watch begins. Nothing dramatic happens. No great storm appears. No mystery unfolds. Only the quiet beauty of the sea remains. Perhaps that is the perfect way to remember the Ghost Fleet, not as a collection of frightening legends, but as a tribute to the countless sailors who crossed these waters with courage, skill, and hope. Some returned safely to the people waiting for them. Some disappeared into history. All became part of the remarkable story of the Atlantic. And now, as the lighthouse slowly fades into the distance and the endless rhythm of the waves continues beneath the moonlit sky, the ocean grows peaceful once more. The Ghost Fleet drifts gently into memory. The stars continue their silent journey across the heavens. The Atlantic whispers softly against the night. And history, with all its beauty, mystery, and quiet wisdom, finally comes to rest. Good night.